In 1858, British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace put pen to paper in his Ternate hut and proposed a theory. The nature of evolution has a natural reasoning, and its nurturing can be measured. The idea of superior traits being passed down from one organism to another was revolutionary if true, but Wallace had yet to corroborate these hypotheses with his peers and felt thusly that he should choose his audience carefully. He wrote to someone he knew to be fascinated in the subject, someone for whom the past 20 years had been gathering observations of their own: English biologist Charles Darwin. Darwin revealed his history of observations to Wallace, and in a move of respect for both scientists, the two men would jointly publish their findings together before the Linnean Society, the world's oldest society devoted to the science of natural history. In the following year of 1859, thanks to Charles's overwhelming research and an additional supportive essay from Wallace, Darwin would publish his magnum opus, On the Origin of Species, a full manuscript to the history of evolutionary theory, an unprecedented step forward for this species' cosmic perspective. This would mark one of the biggest steps forward for a Type 0 civilization, the second step likely being Euler's God equation. Darwin's book was an overnight bestseller and immediately triggered a firestorm of debate. On September 1st, 1939, with the aid of the Slovak Republic and Soviet Union, Germany employed the use of 60 military divisions in its declarative act of World War II. A combined 1.5 million soldiers in total, comprised of 2,000 battle tanks, 900 bombers, and over 400 fighter planes, Germany would amass their numbers along the northern border of Poland. The invasion of Poland was swift. By day 2 of fighting, nearly 20,000 soldiers had died, and many of the civilians were being transferred to a variety of ghettos in the country. The concentration camps were still being finalized, and for families seeking refuge, the ghettos were the last shelter available. When the camps eventually became operational, more and more civilians were pulled from their ghettos and sent to these encampments. Those caught attempting to flee the inevitable death sentence were often marched into the forest or left in the street for execution. My family got the former. If the children were lucky enough to survive punishment, they'd likely be sent to the manual labor yards of these camps, and when arriving at a place like Auschwitz, some were even given the title of Sonderkommando. These were work units consisting of Jewish prisoners responsible for various duties in the gas chambers and crematoriums. One, in particular, would go on to become a teacher at a university in the United States, post-liberation of World War II. His experience as a 9-year-old in Auschwitz kept him fighting against subjugation for the rest of his life, and informed his duties as a mentor to his future students. His name was Erich Lencher. So here we are, Charles versus Magnus, the world versus the X-Men. There was a time not long ago when it felt like the window for the X-Men in Marvel's cinematic campaign had passed. I thought maybe these characters had finally evolved beyond the need for these stories. But the older I get, the more I read and watch, the more it's become clear, as has been apparent, that the X-Men are not just our past. They have been our present. These characters are the allegories that refuse to mince words, ideas that are the antithesis to playing coy with the truth. The real X-Men, the ones here in these 10 episodes, are commonplace. They're a Holocaust survivor, a grieving father, a lost lover, a soldier, a son, a mother, an empath, all of whom have a lot more left to say. These X-Men show us our impulses as a species that's evolved from fear, how we would rather kill the ununderstandable because, as Magneto says, we have to be the best at everything. It's those ugly truths that cross-stitch each uniform on Marvel's most iconic team. It's those dense threads that make the X-Men what they are, and X-Men 97 what it is. Astonishing. Why nurture more stories about Magneto or Cyclops or Storm or Cable? Why explore nature at its evolutionary doorstep or revisit the ethics of humanity caught in the headlights when our conclusions have reached the same old drawing board 100 times before? Because these allegories are meant to be that firestorm. They're meant to catalog our debate of nature versus nurture, of subjecting the objective superior, When Charles speaks, the X-Men hear a prophet. When Magnus speaks, they hear themselves. The fact that X-Men 97 manages to capture all of that, through animation, through dialogue, through music and action, it is the clearest evidence yet that the ethos within Marvel Entertainment has a lot more left to say. And as long as Marvel brings this kind of passion to the table, it's the future of these characters that will reap the biggest dividends. The Avengers are a fantasy, an ideal we've worshipped thanks to flashy personas and larger-than-life character arcs. The X-Men are a drama, a window we look out of into a world of exhausting ironies and complex lies. The X-Men are a team born from the grayest of connotations, burdened with the responsibility of always choosing peace when they could just as easily smite the world with a step. Realizing the magnitude of that ethos for all of this team is difficult, because we needed to see these characters at their most vulnerable, their most powerful, and how they struggled to keep the world at eye level. The power of their commentary is reliant upon human nature never changing, and it won't, because we know who we are for better or worse. The X-Men are not men trying to be gods, but gods trying to be men. That's their purpose. As a period piece that never fully transitions, X-Men 97 is a proactive conversation about a society in crisis, about ethics and genocide and discrimination and morality and empathy. To dislike those connotations is to dislike the entire point of the X-Men, and 97 continuously refuses to pull its punches or half-ass the people under the spandex. I have so much respect for this series because of those punches, and it's clear to me, as it was from episode 1, that Marvel absolutely, undoubtedly understands the significance of its most important team, their evolution, and the origin of species. For your consideration. The X-Men have always been children of the Atom. Magneto, Storm, Cyclops, and Jean. These are the characters that act as our guides for the ride that is X-Men 97, and it's rather appropriate. Excluding Storm, these personalities broke ground when tasked with introducing the X-Men to the comic book world back in X-Men #1, September of 1963. At the time, there was nothing quite like them on the market. The idea of mutants or biologically superior beings had existed in universe already, most notably Namor the Submariner, who officially got the title of mutant in Fantastic Four Annual #1. Yes, the Doom Patrol did exist at a similar time under DC's My Greatest Adventure anthology, but like Pokemon's rise to Digimon's fall, the X-Men came out swinging. They were bolder, cleaner, much more marketable personalities and powers that inspired their readers to keep reading. Categorically described as the strangest superheroes of all. Remember, this was a mere 18 years after World War II, and that was a bold swing by Lee and Kirby to take the modernisms of a post-World War II America and refocus that attention away from the culture of the country and into the culture of the people, the social issues. This was an era of comics dominated by the likes of The Flash, Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, the Fantastic Four, and so many others. If you're noticing a pattern of characters with larger-than-life personas, that's what the audiences were buying. The X-Men series came into this landscape and fundamentally changed the notion of the hero's story. It chose to play within the gray of the spandex, to put a finger on the pulse of the social climate and position a superhero team front and center of the civil rights movement. Where other heroes could hide behind their masks or fantastical powers, the X-Men were exposed by design. They were impactful due to the connotations of their time, and forever relevant because of it. focus on the core of Scott, Aurora, on Jean and Franklin, on Magnus and Anya and Kurt and Jubilee and Logan. It's a commitment to the truth behind these characters, and it shows how the writers, the showrunners, the artists, and animators all knew where to express the best ideas within the context of this world. Magneto is the outcry of evolution attempting to take its next steps, the survivor of humanity's worst afflictions, forever chained to their hubris. Throughout history, Magneto has had many prominent stories, some that even changed the course of the X-Men mythology, and others that simply evolved the optics of being a villain. With perfectly timed visuals like his Holocaust tattoo or the earth beneath his feet, his portrayal in X-Men 97 is striking. The DNA of Fatal Attractions, arguably this show's greatest influence, guides his convictions. The tension he brings on screen pulls this team in different directions, and the writers make it a point to give his story the gravitas it needed. Magneto's experiences should always be central to the conversation of the X-Men, like they have been in so many stories before. Magnus has never felt more relevant as the antihero, and I liken him to this twisted version of Noah, bringing his ark to the shores and pleading with evolution to see itself forward. I believe it's not just important to show Magneto as a staple of the X-Men's legacy, but also as their necessary inverse, and it never fails to give these headlining characters the space they need to be important. Storm is one of those characters. She's as close to a god as any X-Men can be, and she embarks on a journey of self-reflection akin to Spider-Man No More. It's a really wonderful theme that matches the story this season is telling. This idea of evolution and the world knowing better, learning from the mistakes, learning how to grow. It's really about time more X-Men stories gave Storm the Omega-level treatment she's deserved, with a story that scales to her personality. The character who arguably receives the biggest upgrade, however, is Scott, the most human on the team. He's shown to be the textbook Boy Scout, but struggling to lead this diverse team through a turbulent landscape that's riddled with characters and their own conflicts. He sometimes second-guesses himself, but constantly makes big ethical decisions for his X-Men, for his family, and in the presence of the world stage with the UN. Whether it's his relationship with Magneto, with Charles, with Jean, even with himself, he does all of this while seeking the right to live his own life and be the father he never really had. It's a knife's edge that the writers balance pretty much every episode, further punctuated with some of the most emotional payoffs that Cyclops as a character has ever had. The amount of justice done for Scott in X-Men 97 as a character and hero is enough to wash out the bad taste of the Fox universe, and I've never been more confident in his appeal to the larger comic book audience should future X-Men stories commit themselves to the evolution he's found in X-Men 97. Jean also gets a unique spin on her relationship with herself that's quite dark for an animation, but it adds different traits to her story that celebrate the character's history. From being a clone, to an abuse survivor, to a redemptive mother, an eventual phoenix, we get a crash course in Jean's history, and none of it ever feels cheap. Her expanding relationship with Scott and Nathan proves it's easy to show the X-Men as people if you take the time to do so. X-Men 97, even at a breakneck pace, always takes the time to show what's important. This series not only respects these unique team conditions, as all iconic X-Men stories have before it, but it commits to telling this story from the ground up by pulling different characters, histories, and team-centered dynamics all together at once. It's kept the moral, ethical, and physical confrontations between characters actively in play constantly. It examines why these heroes do what they do, where these decisions will lead them, and how their philosophies reflect the larger picture. It's this passion for storytelling that I love most about this series. It's this imagination that I admire alongside the best any X-Men experience has to offer, and it's these heroes who carry the burden of telling this story with an energy that's been sorely missing. The X-Men are at their best when they get to be themselves, when they get to flex their immense powers and interact with each other like a traditional soap. It's really no surprise then that the success found here is because of how the team is handled and how the writers weave this story together from different X-Men comics into one genre-defining experience. Fatal Attractions, Asteroid M, God Loves Man Kills, Operation Zero Tolerance, The Uncanny X-Men, and a little bit of X-Force, and oh yeah, relevant in-universe cameos. That is a history lesson on the impact of the X-Men all at once, all here on display. Where some recent Marvel projects have felt like studio-mandated husks in the release window, X-Men 97 is easily one of the greatest X-Men anything of all time. And and a new bar being set by Marvel Entertainment. Evolution thrives in darkness, and if anything, X-Men 97 invites mutants to be relevant again. Quietly over the last few years, Marvel has been trying to remember its history-setting formula. It's no secret that streaming demands and a change in Marvel leadership affected the quality of everything. The MCU replaced craftsmanship with convenience, ambitious ideas with unimaginative automation. Everything had to hit a streaming release window, and the line always had to go up. But that is the quickest way to lose touch with your imagination and your fans. This is where X-Men 97 corrects that tailspin and favors direction over digestibility, a show written by X-Men experts for X-Men fans to be enjoyed by everyone. This is the first modern animated series for Marvel's biggest comic book team, and it's no secret that the X-Men were knighted to lead the upcoming phases. So this didn't just have to work, it had to be a resounding win for the audience and the characters. We needed to see the X-Men prove they could retain their power over the cultural conversation, especially in today's industry output, and it had to show that these heroes could take the reins of a legacy dating back to Iron Man, in full stride, with confidence. Luckily, X-Men 97 is that wombo combo, that weathered fighter getting back in the ring to remind us of the glory days of a universe that wasn't bloated with empty calorie cameos and low-stakes plot devices. It's full of maturity and philosophy and rising tensions that aren't undermined. It's a story about survivors coming to terms with their abusive relationships and then spinning those adult themes into the payoffs for each hero. Like all the great moments in X-Men 97, the best of these payoffs comes in threes: the visuals, the composition, and the score. In these three departments, X-Men 97 has no animated rival. It is the best animation in a superhero series we've ever had, on top of its precise storytelling. This series goes the extra mile in all departments, matching each significant story beat with vibrant colors, deliberate pacing, and well-placed music. It has some of the most imaginative fight choreography, character blocking, cinematography, and scene sculpting I think I've seen in animation. And it's not just impressive animation, it's evolved animation. Watching Kurt and Logan work around each other to protect Rogue is a top-tier X-Men moment. Sitting with the Summers at a diner as the world ends holds more emotion than the entire DCEU. Watching the trial of Magneto unite his philosophy and his character arc with visuals that meet the moment is necessary. The scope of both confrontations on Asteroid M represents how it feels to actually read these comics. The music, from a minor key change to a swelling orchestra, shows the power of a great soundtrack and how it can completely crystallize an experience into something more. There is power behind this kind of imagination in this score and animation, and there is power in using this medium of storytelling as it was intended. There's honestly a lot more you could say about the story, the characters, the action, the animation, the visuals of this series that I'm sure others have said already. So instead, I'm just going to keep this short, brief, and direct to the point about the things that stood out to me most during my second rewatch. First and foremost, this series was metal as shit. From the great horror sequences to the momentum of chaotic scenes, X-Men 97 is violent and epic and metal, and I love that. I love the Nightcrawler and Wolverine team-up. In fact, every team-up in this show is done masterfully. I think it's one of the strongest moments in the series, and it's punctuated with an outstanding score. It pairs with Kurt's swashbuckling charm, and it feels like he's dancing on the strings of a violin while he fights the Sentinels. Logan is blunt and direct, as he always should be, and Wolverine's entire use in this show is precise and perfect. I love how Wolverine's claws have a little bit of a Hulk 181 look to them in the beginning episodes, and then they switch over to a more Chris Claremont, Frank Miller, Jim Lee look when Logan stabs Magneto in episode 9, essentially bringing the Fatal Attractions influence full circle. I love the use of different suits throughout the story. We start with the iconic Jim Lee design and then move into the Uncanny X-Men, which is the look I grew up with. I love how carefully the cameos in this series were used. From Captain America to Spider-Man to Silver Samurai and Omega Red and Daredevil and Black Panther and so many others. It left me asking questions about the in-world communication between the different heroes. Like, would Tony Stark now be upset about Magneto for his EMP? Would the Avengers take it as an overreach of power by the X-Men, and would they try to step in before the finale? At the time, we didn't have these answers, but what happened to the villains like Doom and Zemo? What happened to the heroes we saw in the story? The writers really didn't waste the opportunity to use specific characters in specific situations if the story called for it. if it made sense, and it made the whole animated Marvel universe feel way more connected. I also really like Bastion as this villain. He's pitched as a smooth-talking businessman, an entrepreneur type who embodies the complex lies of humanity with the curse of being a mutant. His story is really interesting, and it keeps the world-level politics against the X-Men perfectly centered at all times. X-Men 97 made the old stuff feel new and creative. That's all I've really wanted from any comic adaptation. You give us a cunning villain, conversations that go layers deep, striking imagery, and great conflicts, and you have a recipe for greatness. Rogue's journey following Remy's death is the perfect subplot, and it takes the heavy-handedness of her grief and molds it back into more character development for her. The intensity of the emotions with all of the characters, but specifically with Rogue, is in play at all times, and I really appreciated that. Finally, I love how this show uses language, whether it be Sinister speaking to Jean as if she's an abuse victim, with sinister undertones, or how Magnus and Charles clash their philosophies in the deep crevices of each other's minds, how Bastion speaks about humanity's place in the socio-ecological pond, and so on and so on. Every character and their conflicts and the visuals and the music and the stories were all building up into the finale. And not only do we get payoff for the narratives, the visuals, and the canon itself, but we get a perfect landing for a season of television that Marvel desperately needed. We build into Apocalypse and potentially Kang by using different timelines from different teams, and we still have a lot of mysteries left unsolved, but we're combining all kinds of different comics into one cohesive vision, and that itself is just next level craftsmanship. The magic of the X-Men is how the potency of their stories never has to change, because we never change. They continue to be the ripples in a socio-ecological pond, inextricably linked in a battle of nature versus nurture, changed forever thanks to Darwin, but evolved from the latter. The time period in which they were created, and the allegories they represent, are as fundamental to who they are as are the colors they wear. And X-Men 97, like the best X-Men stories before it, shows us our world as it is exactly. Complicated, evolving, cruel, and worth saving. It could so easily come across as pandering or cheap, but it doesn't. It just knows when to hold on what's important and when to enjoy what's sentimental. Spinning character conflicts around one another as good as any soap would, into massive visual payoffs as any great comic book would. If we're going to have a conversation using the X-Men, then trust the audience to moderate those themes like adults, and don't pull your punches. And believe me, X-Men 97 doesn't. I haven't had this much fun with a comic book show in a long time. Loki Season 2 was special for so many reasons, but other than that, I had been waiting for something like this, and X-Men 97 is historic for so many more reasons. I really like this season, and I hope we go somewhere worthwhile in Season 2. I have a feeling we will, but for now, the X-Men remain relevant, and I'm grateful for that. And as always, thanks for watching.